92 years old. My hands shake when I lift this cup, not from fear anymore, just from time doing what it always does. The doctor says my heart is tired. I don't blame it. It carried a man who lived carefully for far too long. Most people think I'm lucky. I lived a long life. I stayed out of trouble. I paid my bills. I retired with a gold watch and a polite handshake. But I need to tell you something before my voice gives out. I did not die at 92. I died at 30. That was the year I stopped asking myself what I wanted and started asking what was safe. Everything after that was just breathing. I look around this room now. The walls are clean, too clean. No children's drawings taped to the fridge, no music playing from another room, just the hum of a refrigerator and a clock reminding me I'm still here. If you're listening to me right now, I want you to understand this. I am not here to inspire you. I am here to warn you. Because the most dangerous thing that can happen to a human being is not failure. It's comfort. I grew up watching men who wore their tiredness like a badge of honor. My father came home every evening at the same hour. Shoes by the door. Silence at the table. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He was simply spent. Whatever life had been inside him in the morning had already been traded away by dusk. I told myself I would be different, but I also told myself I would be careful. Those two promises don't sit well together. In my early 20s, I felt the days stretch out in front of me like a long, forgiving road. If I wasted a year, what was a year? If I made the wrong choice, I could correct it later. I believed life kept receipts, that I could return my mistakes unopened and ask for something better. I didn't understand that time only moves in one direction, and it doesn't slow down for regret. I remember standing in front of a mirror one morning, adjusting my collar, noticing how smooth my face still was. No lines, no grey. I thought, I'll take risks when I'm older, when I know more, when I'm steadier. Youth makes you arrogant in quiet ways. You think experience will arrive without cost. There were moments, small ones, when my real life tried to begin. An idea scribbled on scrap paper, a conversation that made my heart race, an opportunity that felt dangerous and alive, and every time I did the same thing. I postponed. I told myself discipline was maturity, that restraint was wisdom, that people who leapt without looking were irresponsible. What I didn't realize was that courage doesn't arrive fully formed. It grows through use, and every time I chose safety, mine weakened. By 25, I had learned how to explain my choices convincingly. I could make a cage sound like a shelter. I could make fear sound like prudence. People praised me for it. That's smart, they'd say. You're thinking long term. You've got your head on straight. Praise is dangerous when it rewards the wrong instinct. At night, though, when no one was watching, a restlessness would crawl into bed with me. I'd stare at the ceiling, feeling an unnamed pressure behind my ribs. Not pain, not sadness, possibility. I ignored it the way you ignore a ticking sound you can't locate. You tell yourself it's nothing, that you'll check it later. Later. I didn't know yet how often that word would betray me. By the time I reached 30, I had become reliable, predictable, approved. And somewhere in that process, without ceremony or warning, the man I could have been stopped asking for attention. He didn't scream, he didn't protest, he just went quiet. That's how it begins. Not with a dramatic failure, not with a single wrong decision, but with a series of reasonable ones that slowly drain the color from your days. I didn't feel like I was wasting my life. That's the cruel part. I felt like I was doing everything right, and that's exactly why it took me 60 more years to realize I was already gone. By the time my 20s were nearly gone, I had learned how to move without going anywhere. My days were full. That was my proof. I woke before the sun, rushed through mornings, filled notebooks, answered questions, met expectations. From the outside, it looked like a life being built brick by brick. From the inside, it felt like walking on a treadmill and calling it a journey. I remember the first time I noticed it. I was riding the train home, pressed between strangers, watching my reflection in the darkened window. My face looked older than I expected. Not aged, just dulled, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I tried to shake the thought away. Thinking too much felt indulgent, dangerous. People who thought too much asked uncomfortable questions, and uncomfortable questions threatened stability. I had already learned that stability was something to protect. So I stayed busy. Busy was my favorite disguise. If someone asked how I was doing, I'd say, keeping busy. If my chest felt tight, I'd say, just tired. If a quiet voice inside me whispered, is this all? I drowned it out with obligations. There's a particular pride that comes with endurance, with showing up no matter how you feel. I wore that pride well. I believed it made me strong. What it really made me was numb. Friends drifted in and out of my life. Some took risks, moved cities, chased ideas, loved recklessly. When they failed, I nodded sympathetically and secretly congratulated myself for being smarter. I didn't see the envy yet. It takes time for envy to admit itself. Every now and then, usually late at night, I'd imagine an alternate version of my life. One where I'd taken a wrong turn on purpose, where I'd been embarrassed, where I'd failed loudly and learned something sharp and unforgettable. Those thoughts scared me, so I told myself a story I would repeat for years. I'll do something meaningful once I'm secure. Security became my horizon, always visible, never reachable. I started measuring my life in increments that sounded responsible, 5-year plans, long-term goals, sensible milestones, each one carefully designed to delay any real risk. People called me disciplined. I didn't correct them, but discipline without direction is just control. And control, I learned too late, is not the same as purpose. As my 30s approached, something subtle shifted. The world didn't feel as open anymore. Choices began closing quietly. Like doors, you don't notice shutting until you try to walk back through them. I told myself I was still young. I was. But youth, I would learn, is not measured by age. It's measured by how many futures you still believe in. Mine were already thinning. I didn't know it then, of course. I still believed I was preparing for life. I didn't realize I was practicing how to avoid it. By my mid-30s, the job knew me better than most people did. It knew when I'd arrive, how much pressure I could tolerate, how far I'd bend without breaking, and it took note. There's a strange comfort in being predictable. You become useful, dependable. People stop questioning you, and you stop questioning yourself. I told myself that was respect, but respect earned by obedience has a cost. I began measuring my worth by productivity. On days when I accomplished less, I felt smaller. On weekends, when there was nothing urgent to fix, an unease crept in. I didn't know how to rest without feeling guilty. Rest felt like stealing time from something important. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, long after everyone else had gone home. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that hums. My reflection stared back at me from the dark computer screen. I looked older than I felt inside. I thought, if I stay just a little longer, they'll notice. They always did. Praise is intoxicating when you're starving for meaning. My wife stopped asking when I'd be home. She learned my schedule the way you learn the weather, by observation, not conversation. When we did talk, my sentences were clipped, practical, efficient. I brought the office home with me, folded into my tone. One night, she said something that still echoes. "You're always somewhere else." I laughed it off, told her she was exaggerating, told her this was just a busy season. Busy seasons have a way of becoming climates. I postponed everything that wasn't urgent. Conversations, vacations, questions about whether this life still fit me. Urgency became my compass. And it always pointed back to work. I stopped asking what I wanted. I asked what was required. That's how the job replaced my name. I wasn't living as myself anymore. I was functioning as a role. And roles don't dream. They perform. By 40, I was respected. By 45, I was indispensable. By 50, I was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. But I told myself this was the price of being responsible. I didn't realize I was paying with years I could never earn back. The most dangerous part wasn't the exhaustion. It was how normal it all felt. Love doesn't disappear all at once. It thins. It grows quieter, politer, less demanding, until one day you realize it's been surviving on crumbs you didn't notice you were dropping. My wife and I stopped fighting because we stopped expecting. People assume that's peace. It isn't. It's surrender dressed up as maturity. We became efficient partners, bills paid on time, dinners prepared, holidays observed. We knew each other's routines better than each other's thoughts. I told myself this was what long marriages looked like, but I remember the night it finally frightened me. I came home late again. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, coat still on, keys in her hand. She'd been waiting to leave, not to run away, just to be somewhere else. She looked at me and said, very calmly, "I don't feel missed." Those 4 words landed heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I wanted to defend myself, to explain how hard I was working, how everything I did was for us. The words lined up in my mouth, well rehearsed, but something stopped me. Because suddenly I realized she wasn't accusing me. She was informing me. Love needs evidence, not intentions, not sacrifices made in silence. Evidence. I promised I'd do better. I meant it in the moment. I held her, told her she mattered, and for a few weeks, maybe even months, I tried. But habits are stronger than promises when fear is involved. Work still felt urgent. Love felt patient. So I attended to what shouted and neglected what whispered. Eventually, she stopped whispering. We slept in the same bed, but lived in separate emotional rooms. Our conversations became about weather, errands, and what needed fixing. The deeper things, the fears, the hopes, stayed untouched, like fragile objects neither of us trusted the other to hold anymore. I don't blame her for the distance. I built it. I thought providing was the same as loving, that showing up financially excused me from showing up emotionally. I didn't know then that love, like any living thing, requires presence more than protection. Years later, when she was gone, I would sit alone and replay moments I dismissed as insignificant. a question unanswered, a hand not held. A night I chose exhaustion over connection. Love doesn't ask for grand gestures, it asks to be noticed, and I noticed it far too late. There's a certain silence that only exists in houses where children never lived. It's not peaceful, it's unfinished. I didn't notice it at first. Silence feels like relief when your life is loud. After long days and longer weeks, coming home to order felt like a reward. No toys on the floor, no raised voices, no chaos. I told myself I preferred it that way. But preference, I learned, is often just justification. When people asked if we had children, I answered casually, no. Sometimes I added, it just didn't work out. I said it the way you mention a cancelled plan, lightly, as if it hadn't altered the entire shape of my life. The truth was heavier. We had names once, not many, just a couple. We spoke them quietly, almost jokingly, as if saying them aloud might make them real too soon. I remember how strange it felt to imagine a voice calling me Dad. I wasn't afraid of loving a child. I was afraid of failing one. I told myself I'd be more ready later, more patient, more secure. I wanted to give a child a better version of me than the one I was at the time. What I didn't understand was that becoming that version required the very thing I was postponing. Children don't wait for you to perfect yourself. They change you while you're still unfinished. Years passed. Opportunities closed gently, without drama. Biology doesn't argue. It just decides. One day, the conversation ended without anyone saying it had ended. And the house adjusted. I noticed it in small ways. Birthdays came and went without cakes. Holidays felt shorter, quieter. We visited other people's children and smiled the polite smiles of guests, not parents. On the drive home, we said very little. I imagined a life where someone carried my expressions without realizing it, where my mistakes became lessons instead of regrets, where love continued forward instead of folding inward. Instead, I learned how to live with the knowledge that my line stopped with me. That kind of grief doesn't shout. It settles, and it stays. The body is honest in ways the mind refuses to be. For years, mine had been sending polite notices. Stiff mornings, lingering fatigue, a tightness that came and went. I dismissed them all. I had trained myself to endure, to push through, to treat discomfort as weakness leaving the body. Then, one afternoon, my body stopped being polite. I was walking down a hallway I'd walked 1,000 times before when the room tilted, just slightly, enough to make me stop. I placed a hand against the wall, feeling its coolness, pretending I was only catching my breath. I told myself I was fine. I always told myself that. Later, sitting alone, I realized something frightening. Not that I might be sick, but that my first instinct had been denial. I was afraid of what slowing down would force me to confront, because slowing down removes excuses. When your body weakens, your inner life gets louder. I began to notice how little I had invested in myself beyond work. My friendships were thin, my hobbies forgotten, my inner world underdeveloped. I had poured everything into function and neglected meaning. Doctors' visits became more frequent. Conversations about diet, stress, rest, words I'd always associated with other people, older people. I nodded, promised changes, made temporary adjustments. But the truth was harder to admit. My dreams were still young, but my body was catching up to the years I'd ignored. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at the edge of the bed and felt a wave of grief I couldn't explain. Not for lost health, for lost courage. I realized then that energy is not just physical. It comes from belief, from feeling like tomorrow holds something worth reaching for. I had spent decades surviving efficiently. My body had kept the score, and now it was asking me a question I could no longer avoid. What were all those healthy years for? I didn't have an answer. That's when I understood that neglect doesn't only cost you time, it costs you strength when you finally need it. When the routine vanished, so did my certainty. For decades, my days had been decided before I woke up. Alarms, schedules, deadlines. A steady rhythm that told me who I was supposed to be. When that rhythm stopped, the quiet felt unnatural, like standing in a room after the music has ended. I tried to fill the time at first. Long walks, small errands stretched into entire mornings. I read the newspaper slowly, even the parts I didn't care about, just to feel occupied. Occupation had always meant safety to me, but there is only so much distraction a man can invent before the silence starts asking questions. Without work, I was left alone with myself for the first time in years. And I realized how little I knew the man sitting in that chair. I had neglected him, assumed he'd be fine on his own. Friends I thought I'd reconnect with were busy living lives that had grown without me. Their voices on the phone were kind but distant, polite, like people speaking to a memory. I noticed how the days lost their edges. Monday felt like Thursday. Time flattened out. Without urgency, my hours drifted unclaimed. One afternoon, I opened a drawer and found the watch they'd given me at my retirement party. Still pristine, still ticking, I strapped it on and laughed softly. I had spent my life chasing time. Now it was following me. I understood then that retirement doesn't create emptiness. It reveals it. It shows you what you built beneath the noise, and beneath mine. There wasn't much. The silence didn't accuse me. It simply waited. And waiting, I learned, can be far more terrifying than being busy. The world has a way of reminding you that it does not pause out of respect. I noticed it first in small humiliations, machines that expected me to know how they worked, conversations that moved too fast for me to follow, words I'd never heard spoken aloud suddenly becoming common language. I told myself it was progress. But beneath that thought was a quieter one. I am no longer being considered. I watched younger people take seats I once occupied, then reshape them entirely. They questioned things I had accepted without protest. They spoke openly about fears I had swallowed. They failed publicly and seemed alive because of it. At first, I judged them. Judgment is a shield. It keeps envy from revealing itself. But envy has patience. I felt it when I saw someone change careers without apology. When I heard about someone starting over at an age I'd considered too late. When I watched risks taken casually that I had treated as reckless my entire life. They were doing the things I'd postponed until someday. Someday had already passed me. I began to see my life from the outside, the way a stranger might. Respectable, stable, quiet. Nothing obviously wrong. And yet, incomplete. There is a particular loneliness that comes from realizing you followed all the rules and still ended up invisible, not to the world, just to yourself. I had become a spectator to the kind of life I once imagined living. I clapped quietly, I smiled politely, and inside something mourned. Not the loss of youth, the loss of nerve, The world didn't abandon me. I stepped aside for it, one cautious choice at a time. If I could speak to my younger self now, I wouldn't try to sound wise. Wisdom can feel distant, abstract, easy to dismiss. I'd speak plainly. I'd tell him that fear rarely feels like fear. It feels like responsibility. It feels like patience. It feels like waiting for the right time. I'd tell him that no one ever arrives at courage by thinking their way into it. Courage is built through action, usually clumsy, often embarrassing. I'd tell him that love needs attention more than protection, that people don't feel valued because you worked hard for them. They feel valued because you chose them while you were tired. I'd tell him that failure is not the opposite of success. Numbness is. I'd tell him to pay attention to what drains him and what restores him, to notice which conversations leave him more alive, not more approved. To stop outsourcing his sense of worth to titles, routines, and praise. Most of all, I'd tell him this: life does not ask loudly for your participation. It waits quietly for your permission. You don't lose your life all at once. You trade it away in sensible pieces. You exchange days for comfort, curiosity for certainty, honesty for approval. And one day, you wake up old, still breathing, still functioning, but unable to remember when you last felt truly alive. I would look him in the eyes and say, do not wait for clarity. Clarity comes after movement. Do not wait to feel brave. Bravery is a consequence, not a prerequisite. And do not confuse surviving with living, because one day you may live long enough to realize the most painful truth of all, that you didn't run out of time. You gave it away. If you are listening to me now, and something in you feels restless, good. That restlessness is not a flaw, it is a signal. Listen to it while it still speaks. I am 92 years old. My voice is weak. My body is tired. But I am telling you this with everything I have left. Choose the life that costs you comfort. It is the only one that gives anything back.